India and Southeast Asia have a rich, overlapping history. In art, architecture, language, and religion, India and Southeast Asia share striking similarities. But how and when did Southeast Asia become so Indianized? The answer is hidden in an ancient Cambodian love story. Cambodia's origins are anything but ordinary. The love between a native princess and an Indian merchant served as its foundation. Yup, Cambodia's first king was an Indian merchant, a man known as Kaundinya. Kaundinya's story begins in the 1st century CE. His historical name, Kaundinya, provides the first insight into his life because it's not his true given name. Kaundinya is a reference to a Brahmin community that populates the Andhra Orissa coast, a region commonly known as Kalinga. Kalinga was a powerhouse of early Indian trade, and their merchant mariners were called Sadhava. Kaundinya himself was a Brahmin Sadhava, and it's likely that he was wealthy and well-connected. He was the owner of one or more large merchant vessels, or boiras, the expertly crafted, square-sailed ships of Kalinga. There was at least one major manufacturing center for boiras at Golubai, on Lake Chilika. Lake Chilika also served as a port of departure for merchants. As a large body of water with a narrow opening to the sea, it offered a natural, protected harbor. But before we turn our focus back to Kaundinya, let's take a look at the bigger picture. In this era, foreign trade was so extensive that port cities like Nagapattinam had bazaars crowded with crates of imported goods. This trade is associated with a long period of rising prosperity in both South and Southeast Asia. But trade wasn't limited to the East. In the West, Rome had just conquered Egypt, and thanks to the revitalization of old Egyptian maritime routes, Romans and Indians began trading extensively. Roman senators were hyper-concerned about hyperdeflation, as so much of their silver was being depleted by being sent to India through trade. So with all that in mind, let's get back to Kaundinya. Kaundinya set sail for Southeast Asia in the 1st century CE, but how did he actually get there? In that era, Indian mariners would wait for seasonal monsoon winds coming from the northeast. Using these winds, they quickly sailed down the coast, all the way to Sri Lanka. Along the way, mariners would conduct trade at urban centers on the coast. Then from the northern tip of Sri Lanka, Indian mariners would cut a straight path to Southeast Asia, across the Bay of Bengal. Severe weather and rampant piracy made this crossing extremely dangerous. But dangers notwithstanding, they would arrive in Southeast Asia at the mouth of the Andaman Sea. From here, Indian mariners could continue into the Straits of Malacca, hug the southern coast of Sumatra all the way to Java, make a brief land crossing at the Isthmus of Kra. We don't know which specific route Kaundinya took, but we do know that he eventually found himself in the Gulf of Thailand, ready to do business. Kaundinya could have been carrying a variety of high-demand Indian goods: cotton textiles, jewelry, and metalware. In addition, he could have been carrying Western goods. All of this valuable cargo put a target on Kaundinya's back. Pirates would almost certainly be lurking on the fringes. And wouldn't you know it, they were. Kaundinya's ship was surprise attacked by local pirates. He and his crew fought bravely and successfully repulsed the pirates, but the ship was damaged during the attack. Kaundinya was forced to beach the ship for repairs. While beached, Kaundinya and his crew must have feared a second attack, but they needn't have worried. For the pirates had been employed by a local chieftain, whose daughter, Soma, had fallen in love with the handsome young merchant. It was Kaundinya's bravery during the attack that won her affections. Soma sent over a marriage proposal. Kaundinya must have been surprised, or perhaps he feared for his life should he reject it. In the end, he accepted the proposal. This is considered a landmark event in Cambodian history, the establishment of its first true kingdom, with an Indian merchant sitting on its throne. But Kaundinya and Soma's marriage was not the last of its kind. It would serve as a blueprint for many Indian Southeast Asian political marriages to come. We're interested in the capital T truth. So why did Soma actually marry Kaundinya? And why were Indian Southeast Asian political marriages so common? In the late classical era, Southeast Asia was characterized by fragile, politically fractured states. But change was on the horizon. With rising trade came an influx of wealth, and new agricultural developments led to a population boom. State reforms were seen as necessary to address these new challenges. And that's where Indianization comes in. Indian political and cultural traditions had already solved these societal challenges. India was already densely populated, wealthy, and urbanized. For hundreds of years, in fact. Simply put, Indianization was a solution to the problems that Southeast Asia now faced. And who better to implement Indianization than Indians themselves? Educated Indians were imported in droves. For example, Brahmin clerks were brought from India to serve in Southeast Asian administrations. And most of these Indian immigrants married local women, often noble women. Access to nobility gave Indian immigrants institutional legitimacy. In other words, they were given power and the means to wield it. Chinese historical records are illuminating in this regard. These records make reference to several Indian immigrants who became royals in Cambodia. Reports include one king of Funan, Chandana, yes, another immigrant from India, who sent a gift of elephants to Jin Dynasty China. Another one of these reports include an Indian Brahmin whose name also translates to Kaundinya. This Kaundinya II supposedly heard a voice telling him that he was a rightful ruler of Funan, and so he journeyed to the east. When he arrived in Funan, reports indicate that he was welcomed warmly and was selected as their new king, presumably by marrying a local princess. The Chinese report even points out, Kaundinya changed all the laws to conform to the system of India. Active yet peaceful social transformation is rare, and it's even more rare for foreigners to lead the transformation. That's why the Indianization of Southeast Asia is such a surprising historical moment. To summarize, foreign immigrants were brought in to fill the ranks of elite society. These new immigrants were actually encouraged to shape the local culture so that it more closely resembled their own. And all of this happened without threats, violence, or other pressure. But Indianization wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous process occurring over a 1,000-year period. The story of Kaundinya and Soma is just one of many in this larger saga. So returning to our original question, why did Soma choose Kaundinya? The answer should be obvious now. Kaundinya was exactly what she needed to succeed in an increasingly Indianized world. As a Southeast Asian noblewoman, Soma could offer institutional legitimacy. Kaundinya, on the other hand, was a wealthy and well-connected merchant with extensive political and commercial networks in India. Kaundinya's Indianness was an advantage with real-world, measurable consequences. It's worth noting, Soma's family was not that powerful. They controlled only a small sub-region of Khmer territory, but Kaundinya's arrival changed their fortunes. Together, Kaundinya and Soma expanded this humble state into a large and prosperous kingdom. Perhaps this rapid expansion was made possible by Kaundinya's Indianness. He had the tools to fast-track the process of Indianization, after all. Between the 4th and 8th centuries CE, several prosperous empires emerged in India and Southeast Asia. Each of these entities were heavily engaged in the Indianization process, the Guptas and the Pallavas exporting their culture, and Srivijaya importing it. But this wasn't entirely a one-way exchange. Southeast Asia had at least some impact on the subcontinent too. Consider the Pallava dynasty. The Pallavas were a wealthy and powerful trading empire whose origins have been the subject of a spirited debate. Early historians suggested Persian roots, while later historians suggested Tamil or Telugu roots. These historians had an incomplete view, however. Recent scholarship has revealed a hybrid South Indian and Southeast Asian origin. See, the Pallava dynasty began with the South Indian king's marriage to a queen who was referred to as a Naga. The Naga queen may have actually been Southeast Asian. Consider the term Naga itself. The term Naga, which denotes a race of mythical snake humans, has long been associated with the people of Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, for example, Khmer royalty made Naga iconography essential to their identity, and Naga carvings litter their temples and palaces. Perhaps this connection shouldn't be too surprising, given what we know about the Pallava dynasty. The Pallavas had a long history of inserting themselves into international affairs in the rest of Asia. For example, in the early 700s, they entered into a mutual defense pact with Tang Dynasty China. But let's explore another story from the dynasty's past. In 731 CE, the Pallavas were on the brink of collapse. Their king, Parameshvara, suddenly died in battle, leaving no direct heir. There was a danger that rival kingdoms would encroach on their territory. The Pallavas had to find the proper king to take the throne, and they had to do it quickly. A formal delegation was created to find Hiranya, the descendant of an ancient Pallava prince named Bhima. Bhima was an ancestor of the now deceased king, so his descendants, Hiranya and others, would have a right to take the throne. But there was a catch. Hiranya was not to be found in India. For Bhima had traveled abroad, married a Southeast Asian princess, and had become the ruler of a foreign kingdom through that marriage. Now I'd say that's a familiar story, don't you think? So with all this in mind, the Pallava delegation boarded a ship to Southeast Asia to speak to Bhima's descendant, King Hiranyavarman. It's believed that he was the leader of the Champa kingdom, located in modern-day Vietnam. When they arrived at Hiranya's court, the delegation was warmly received, and soon enough, the delegation got down to business. They asked for one of Hiranya's sons to come back to India and take the Pallava throne. Hiranya's youngest son agreed to this mission. At just 12 years old, he made the journey to South India. He was given the regnal name Nandivarman II and ascended the Pallava throne. Rival claimants and power-hungry nobles felt this was a wrong decision. After all, Nandivarman II was a foreigner. To quell this concern, Nandivarman II and his supporters made efforts to highlight his true Pallava heritage. But here's some food for thought. What made his background true is that he was of mixed Indian and Southeast Asian ancestry, just like the original pairing that founded the Pallava dynasty. Nandivarman II would grow to become an extremely successful king. He was perhaps the greatest of the Pallavas, presiding over an empire at its apex, an economic and cultural golden age. And all this he accomplished as a foreigner. Nandivarman's foreign origins seem to have ensured his continued interest in Eastern affairs. For example, inscriptions written on his behalf have been found in northern Malaysia, in the kingdom of Kedah. Interestingly, this kingdom is located in the Bujang Valley, which roughly translates to Valley of the Serpents. And in Sanskrit, the term Bujang is a synonym of the term Naga. Very curious indeed. Nandivarman II is, like Kaundinya and other pioneers before him, a symbol of Indianization and the deep connection between India and Southeast Asia. Only today, after 6 centuries of Chinese, Arab, and European influence, has the contribution of India been neglected. And now you know.